Hey everyone, welcome to the December 20th edition of Lunch with Lincoln. It starts now. Welcome everybody to Lunch with Lincoln. My name is Marco Valera. I'm the political director at the Lincoln Project. And joining us today is Texas State Representative Julie Johnson, represents the northwest corner of Dallas. Thank you for joining us, Representative.
Thank you so much for having me, Marco. It's great to be here with you again.
Thank you so much. So lots of news coming out of Texas the last few weeks. I guess we'll just jump right in with redistricting wrapping up in several parts of the country. Some states have been finished for some weeks now. I wanted to ask you, as a duly elected representative in Texas, how is redistricting going in Texas? We've been seeing that that there's a federal lawsuit now with the lines being submitted. The Department of Justice is looking into if there's any Voting Rights Act violations with the new maps, and maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that and if the new maps have affected you in any way.
Right. Well, the redistricting process in the Texas legislature honestly was just a hot mess. It was exceedingly partisan, which, you expect redistricting to be somewhat partisan. But the problem is they completely ignored every aspect of racial equality in terms of our districts. For example, since the last redistricting session, our population in Texas has grown by over 4 million people. And 95% of that population growth is in communities of color. 95%. So you would think, okay, if Texas is going to gain 2 congressional seats, for example, which we did, and that is all due to growth in communities of color, then those districts should be drawn such that communities of color would have the opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. Texas did not do that. They drew the lines in this crazy way. It's almost like drunk people with an Etch-a-Sketch, with no sense in terms of population, in terms of voting, the voting rights law itself. And they drew 2 very white districts and gerrymandered the heck out of our racial communities. And so much so that the Justice Department really sees a strong and clear violation of the Voting Rights Act and has filed suit against the state because of it.
What do you think the timeline on the case will be? Is this going to be something that is going to be the effects of which are going to be felt in 24, or are they going to be in time for 22?
Well, in a perfect world, they would be in time for 22. We just had our candidate filing deadline. We just had everyone file. It was December 13th when everyone had to file for office under the lines that was passed. But the lines are so unfair, and they really, really do harm to communities of color in terms of their opportunity to cast their votes, as the law protects them. So hopefully the federal courts will rocket that lawsuit through in time for them to have a meaningful change with respect to the 2022 election. But as a lawyer, I know that courts are slow, and it depends on their motivation and whether or not the Supreme Court will intervene before the 2022 election. I'm hopeful, but I'm not optimistic about that.
Well, we certainly hope it gets resolved sooner rather than later. You mentioned talking about the communities of color. We're talking about the Latino community. We're talking about the African American community. Texas is a really special place. In a lot of states, those populations are usually concentrated in urban centers, which we do have in Texas. There's a large Latino population, large African American population in Houston, Dallas, but we also see large segments of that population in some of the more rural counties in Texas, especially along the border. And so what I was going to ask you, Representative, is we saw last year that former President Trump overperformed when it came to communities, Latino communities along the border, specifically with young men. What do you think the Democrats and what do you think can be done in Texas to kind of address that? Is it a messaging issue? Is it a policy issue? What can be done to kind of bring that back, bring those voters back home?
Well, I think there are several things. Number one, I think political parties of both sides need to quit assuming that because of this color of someone's skin that they're going to vote a certain way. They make assumptions that if you're white, you're going to vote Republican, which isn't true. They're going to make assumptions that if your skin is brown, you're going to vote Democrat, which isn't true. You're going to vote, people vote because of their morals and values and belief structures that they have, and also jobs and the economy and their ability to support their families and things that are important to them. So Democrats, we have a strong record on creating jobs, on our policies that really help and improve the lives of families of Texans, regardless of the color of your skin. And we need to do a much better job of articulating those messages. So, for example, we're in one of the most acute health crises in our lifetimes that we've all faced that has a severe impact on our abilities to work, the health and safety of our families, and our ability to, pay our mortgage every day. And Democrats have processes in place to A, make sure that you can get health care, B, make sure you're healthy enough to go to work so that you can earn a paycheck so that you can pay that mortgage so that your family isn't living in a street. Republicans' policies are doing everything in controversy to that. So we just have to do a better job of being smart and articulate about the policies that we have and how they're helping Texas families, especially Latinos on the border, and so that they resonate with what we're trying to achieve and how we can help them.
Sure. So we learned yesterday that West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin is a no vote on the Build Back Better legislation. However, just feels like ancient history. The infrastructure bill that was passed just a few weeks ago. Is there something that can be shared? Is there a good message that the Democrats can take out into some of these rural counties that are, elements of that legislation that are going to benefit folks that live outside of these larger metropolitan areas in Texas?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the infrastructure bill will have a significant impact on the lives of rural Texans. We have a huge state. So much of our state has woefully inadequate broadband, with people going more online, with health. What's happening in rural Texas, for example, is rural hospitals are closing in epic numbers because Republicans refuse to participate in Medicaid expansion in our state. We've lost 26 rural hospitals in Texas over the last several years. So now what's happening, if you're in rural Texas, you need telemedicine, you need virtual medicine in order to have any kind of quality doctor's appointment. Well, the Build Back Better plan the infrastructure bill has provided hundreds of millions of dollars for that infrastructure to be put into place so people can go and get the health care they need. We have more teleworking situations. And so that will really help rural Texans. Also, our road structure in Texas really needs to be updated, and our grid and everything else. We all know that we had a huge electric grid failure, and where people lost power and people died and everything just came to a screeching halt. So what we learned here in this state, its infrastructure is critically important to our ability to live a safe, healthy life, for our kids to learn, and for us to be able to work. And the infrastructure bill will go a long way in doing that, and will create a bunch of jobs here in Texas that will put people back to work.
You mentioned the power grid. Before we started the program, I was sharing that that my parents went through that when they live in Texas, and it was a very scary time. It was a very scary time for a lot of people. A lot of people lost their lives. It was a horrible time to be in Texas. We learned recently that Texans now, instead of having this challenge addressed during the legislative session, Governor Abbott is imposing a sort of tax, like a fee on people's power bills, to kind of bring the grid back into normal modern operating standards. I mean, isn't that a burden on everyday working people?
Right. Yes, it's the Abbott tax,
Mm-hmm.
where he is taxing every consumer in Texas so that our oil and gas companies can continue to make billions and billions of dollars. The natural gas industry, they made, I think, something like $11 billion as a result of the week of the freeze, where millions and millions of Texans froze and lost significant resources. Their homes were damaged. They didn't. I passed a bill to make it easier for them. I mean, I offered a bill to make it easier for people to get their homes repaired after the storm. Republicans didn't pass it. Democrats offered legislation to hold gas companies accountable and force them to do the hard work to prepare their infrastructure so this wouldn't happen again. Republicans killed it. Instead, Abbott took a $1 million contribution from the monies that were paid to the natural gas companies for his campaign account, just from one person. And so, that's what's happening. The Abbott tax is taxing everyone's electric bill so that the companies can continue to make more money in Texas and not protect the consumer.
Outrageous. So, so Governor Abbott was unable to find money to modernize and fix the grid, but he has found money to build this new wall of his. There's much ado has been made about this press conference that he had just a day or two ago with a little sliver of wall built behind him. What is he trying to do? What's the message that he's trying to send, and where's he finding the money to do this?
He's just pandering to a base is what he's really trying to do, because his 5-foot wall isn't really going to achieve much. No one wants people to come to our country illegally. We have an immigration system. I think personally what needs to happen is we need a federal overhaul of our immigration system. It is ridiculous how long it takes people to immigrate to this country in a legal fashion. And that really needs to be addressed. The legislature funded a significant amount of resources for our law enforcement on the border to help with security, which that will make an improvement. But this artificial wall that's taking land from homeowners, the thing about it is people who own the land on the border, they don't want the state to come in and take their land away from them. It's been in their families for generations. To build an artificial wall that doesn't work, that isn't going to do what it's intended to do, and that's taking critical resources away from programs that should work and that could work. It's pandering to a base of people who are uninformed on the issue, hoping that Abbott will, can be more conservative than the other crazy people running for governor in our state.
Right. So you mentioned a minute ago pandering to the base, and you just mentioned this, that Governor Abbott is very much trying to avoid a serious primary. However, I think there's candidates out there that have other things to say about that. How's he looking? I mean, he certainly has a monetary advantage. He has money in the bank. He's got a lot of cash on hand. But is his recent behavior the last few months? Is it because he's afraid of maybe a candidate coming out of not necessarily left field, but maybe right field here, and taking votes away from him? Is this a legitimate concern of his?
Well, obviously he's concerned about that, or he wouldn't have steered this ship so far to the right of crazy, out of that, because it's not based on any sound policy whatsoever. But the reality of it is, I don't believe any of the other candidates on the Republican side for governor have a chance to beat Greg Abbott. He's going to be the Republican nominee. But what he is doing, he's really putting himself vulnerable for a general election. Because, in Texas, like in most other states, we have people who are staunchly Democrat who are going to vote Democrat. We have people who are staunchly Republican who are going to vote. But we do have a significant group of independents in the middle. And he is losing the independent vote in record droves. And they're all they're attracting over to Beto O'Rourke because Abbott has driven the Republican Party so far to the right that most independents in Texas think, whether you agree with everything that Beto O'Rourke stands for, whether you agree with everything that Democrats stand for, what you do know is that you have to put a hard stop to this Republican crazy train that we're on, and they have to vote Democrat in order to do that. So I think Abbott is very vulnerable in the general election.
We saw in Virginia, Governor-elect Glenn Youngkin trying to have his campaign keep an arm's length with former President Trump, and trying to prevent any visitations to the state, especially during the home stretch. We saw that on the other hand, in Texas, we saw that former President Trump was just in Dallas at a church service. Do you think as the race after the primaries behind Governor Abbott, we're going to see some of that stiff arming because of the independents that you just mattered, or you think he's going to go in for the bear hug as things get closer to the general?
Well, who knows? If he were smart, he would stiff arm, but he'll probably go in for the bear hug because they can't help themselves. But, Trump in Texas, he won the state, but by the lowest margin of any Republican in the last 30 years. So, I mean, it's not like Trump has some coattails that's going to really help Greg Abbott. And that's where I think that the Republicans in Texas have really lost their way. They're just in this crazy side of their base where they don't understand where real people are. And when people wake up and they think, my kid just died of COVID because this president told people not to get vaccines. My kid just died of COVID because our governor refuses to let school districts do what they need to do to keep my kids safe. My kid just fell a year behind in school because they're not empowering schools to keep my kids safe. I lost my job. So I think these things are really, really important to Texans, and Greg Abbott and his leadership has completely failed.
So looking back the last few months here and kind of the things that Governor Abbott and his Republicans have been kind of doing out in the open, whether that's challenging whether it's lawful to for a gay couple to be married in Texas, or whether removing these information for trans youth from the state website, or even bigger issue, kind of this vigilante abortion law that was passed. I mean, are these issues that independent Texans are watching? Is this going to determine their vote next year?
Oh, for sure. I think Republicans, they went too far and they don't really realize it. I'm going to tell you a story. A constituent reached out to me just last week and asked for a meeting. And of course, I met with her. I meet with every constituent that requests a meeting. And she started the meeting off with, I'm a conservative Republican. I have voted Republican my entire life, and I did not vote for you. But I wanted to meet with you because you're my state representative, and I wanted you to hear how I felt. I am horrified over this abortion bill and what the state of Texas has done for women, and I will be voting Democrat next session. And so that is happening all around. Women are so angry at these Republicans for pushing the needle so far, for taking women back 40 years and making our healthcare unsafe. I think it's going to be very surprising for them come November.
As an attorney, I'm sure no doubt you're watching the actions of the Supreme Court as they consider the different ways to approach this Texas law. What do you foresee in the future?
Well, I was pleased that they allowed the cause of action to go forward. And, Justice Roberts' comments, I thought, were very illuminating in that, we can't allow this legislation to circumvent the role of the Supreme Court and what our role is to do, which is to determine the constitutionality of various positions and various laws in our country. But I was very disappointed that, despite the fact that he clearly felt that the way that this law was crafted was a violation of the separation of powers, was a violation of judicial review, but they allowed it to stay in place pending additional review of the case. I would have preferred that they stayed enforcement pending the judicial process. So it was a kind of a yin and a yang on how this most recent opinion came out. But yeah, I think we have to be very cognizant of what is happening. And, it's just like when Gavin Newsom said he's going to use the same tools for gun rights. But, this is what really concerned me is, I don't know if you saw last week, DeSantis, governor of Florida, it's a crazy match between him and Abbott, announced that they want to use the same structure of a personal enforcement against teachers for how they teach race. That will come to Texas for sure. That they want to be able to empower a parent to sue a teacher for $10,000 if they don't like how that teacher teaches race in their classroom. I find that to be unconscionable. And, if you value public ed and if you're a teacher in this world, you need to pay attention to what's coming down, because this is terrible, I think.
Is that something that the legislature could take up? I know that Texas has a part-time legislature. Is that something they could be called back for to handle? Is that something that would have to wait till the next session? What does that look like?
Well, Abbott, as our governor, has the ability to call a special session at any time.
Mhm.
But as you well know, it's up for it requires us all to decide if we're going to be there and make quorum to allow that legislation to happen. And we all know about that too.
Yeah, we do.
So, we all have our part to play in the process. That's for sure.
Well, um, we released a new ad this morning, called "Yearning in America." We'd like to show that to our guests and show it to you, Representative. So, B, why don't you roll the new ad?
There's a yearning in America, a longing for restoration, an insatiable hunger to rebuild. With nearly 200 million Americans vaccinated and 7 million new jobs created, the message is clear. Americans are ready to work. Donald Trump's catastrophic presidency took its toll, but it did not take us out. With unemployment claims falling as fast as consumer confidence is rising, Americans are buying gifts for loved ones they couldn't even visit just 1 year ago. Today, millions of families are reunited. Yes, there is a yearning in America for our people to grow stronger, to stay healthier, for our nation to regain its prosperity. And though we haven't yet achieved everything we yearn for, it's good to have hope for a change.
That's a good one.
It's a great one, and it's spot on. There is a yearning in America, and that is exactly what we need. I think people, as I have visited with, just so many folks in Texas and across this country at various times, I think we all share some common values, which is we want our government to be fiscally responsible. Don't spend more than we need, spend our money wisely. We all work hard for our dollars and our taxes. We don't want to pay more than we have to. But we also want our government to do its job. We want it to educate every child that's in this country. We want it to keep us safe. We want good roads. We want good infrastructure. And then we want government to get out of the way and not discriminate against any of its citizens and let everyone have an opportunity to succeed. And the problem is that the Republicans and Greg Abbott and Trump in particular has led us so far away from those ideals. And it's up to voters to decide if they're going to do what it takes to bring us back to those core values.
I couldn't agree more, Representative, and I also can't think of a better way to start wrapping up our program today. Representative Julie Johnson, thank you so much for joining Lunch with Lincoln today. We're so happy to have you as a friend of the organization. We appreciate your views and the work that you do in the great state of Texas. We look forward to watching all the great things that you're going to do, and we look forward to staying involved in Texas. So thanks again for joining us, and thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you so much for having me, and we appreciate your voice so much and what you guys are trying to do to highlight the values that we all need to get back to. So thank you so much, and it's great to be with you.